Hello and welcome to the Navigating Risks podcast. My name is Helen Yates and I'm editor of Global Thought Leadership at Gallagher. Today I'm joined by two fantastic guests, Trevor Hutchings, Chief Executive of the Renewable Energy Trade Association, and Carl Gurney, Director of Renewable Energy for Gallagher Retail in the UK and Ireland. We'll be diving into one of the most urgent and transformative topics of our time, the transition to net zero. From the pace of innovation and the realities of energy security to the evolving role of insurers in supporting new technologies and unlocking investment, we'll explore where progress is being made and where challenges still lie ahead. Let's get started.
I'm Carl Gurney, Director of Renewable Energy for Gallagher Retail, UK and Ireland.
And my name's Trevor Hutchings. I'm the Chief Executive of the REA. The thing that all of our members have in common is that that vision for a net zero future driven by renewable energy, and our members want us as the REA to be their voice into government, knowing that if government does the right thing through its policy and regulatory decisions, then that will give confidence to the market, to our members, to continue to invest in renewable energy. And I guess one of the things that is a bit of a differentiator for the REA, because you might think as a renewable energy trade association, our membership's just renewables companies. Well, actually, the renewable sector, includes insurance companies and legal and finance, as well as the developers of renewable energy, the operators of renewable energy, storage, EV solutions. And we sit across all of the technologies, geothermal through to the poster child or children of solar and wind and everything in between. And I think that's where we're seeing the market. There's all of those technologies are converging to a degree where, you can't talk about solar without thinking about battery storage and grid connection and planning. All of these things are coming together. And so I'm proud to lead an organisation that is working across all of that.
So to that vision of net zero, where are we currently at now in the UK, and what are some of the developments that you're most excited about?
Shall I give a bit of an overview and then on where I think we are, and Carl will add to that. But in terms of carbon emissions as the UK, so since 1990, we have more than halved those. And we've also grown our economy at the same time. So, those that say, well, it's either economic growth or it's cutting emissions. No, you can do both. And we've proven that in the UK. And, we have got a legally binding target to get to, a net zero. So very close to 100% by 2050. So we're on that trajectory and we're making good progress and we're growing our economy at the same time. One of the biggest contributors to that progress in the cut in emissions has been the decarbonisation of our power, our electricity system. So now over 50% of our electricity powering this call is coming from renewables and other clean energy sources. So we're making great progress on that front. And we've got a government who's set a target to more or less completely decarbonise the electricity system by the year 2030. So that's progress. And aligned to that, we're seeing more of our economy being electrified, which will also help with that decarbonisation of the economy. But there's still a lot of areas that are difficult to decarbonise and difficult to move to renewable and low carbon technologies. Because for all of the progress we've made on decarbonising electricity, we still use probably around 80% of our overall energy demand as a country still comes from fossil fuels. So we've still got some challenges ahead.
Yeah, and I think what we're probably seeing, the deployment, especially under the current government, is a really enhanced deployment of solar. It's what we're now seeing, both rooftop, which is good to see, and also ground mount. Battery energy storage systems are certainly, coming to the fore very quickly, moving at a pace. And that's really to, stabilise the grid and that demand side of electrification to help the transition across from fossil fuels. We've got long duration energy storage now coming on the horizon. There've been announced of a floor with a cap price to allow, give investor confidence, stakeholder confidence in terms of deploying the bigger systems to really, and that'll help really speed up deployment. I think other areas that probably we've got coming are the warm homes coming in as well. Sort of next year, 15 billion investment from government in terms of that transition from sort of domestic area as well in terms of energy efficiency and also, being able to generate their own power at a domestic level, which is great news to see as well. Geothermal energy is coming to the fore, massive source of energy beneath our feet that we should be extracting and using. And then we've got electric vehicle rollout and decarbonisation of transport as well, which is driven as much by a requirement for clean air, to be perfectly frank, as it is from a climate change perspective. So really good, exciting stuff.
There is so many exciting and innovative developments taking place, but I think that there's sometimes this misconception that all renewable technologies are quite new, but that's not the case, is it?
No, certainly not. A lot of these, if you look at, anaerobic digestion, they use that technology to light the streets in London in Victorian times. So, that's how long it's been around. You look at hydro, you look at solar, these wind even, windmills, it's been around for years. Been in renewable energy now for 22 years. So it's certainly been a long time coming. And like I say, I think we've just learned over the years with these technologies that they work really well. Built well, operated well, maintained well. They produce really good power, very clean power, and can deliver a lot of benefits.
I think one of the significant developments now, I would say, is that quite possibly for the first time ever, consumers, whether you're a homeowner or indeed a business, for the first time no longer has to just be a passive recipient of an energy bill, of an electricity bill, because they can now take steps to reduce that, whether that's a time of use tariff, whether it's entering into these sort of flexibility markets where there's sort of periods of the day or maybe at the weekend when there's no charge for your electricity. Plugging an EV in at certain times can cost very little or even benefit, in terms of a negative cost. You're paying you to plug in because the grid is using that as a battery storage facility to balance the grid. So that and home insulation, a battery, solar panels, all of these things, smart meter, all of that now is putting the control and the power back into the hands of the consumer to really do something about reducing their bills and their consumption. So that is, a great example of the exciting new world that we're entering into.
Let's talk a bit about the role of the insurance industry when it comes to insuring, particularly some of these newer, more prototypical technologies. How important is it?
Yeah, it's hugely important. I think, and it's very difficult for insurers. They love things with historic data, don't they, insurers? Let's be honest. They love lots of history, lots of analytics, lots of data, actuarial data. And some of the newer technologies certainly create that as a challenge for them. But I think what a lot of people forget is how good insurers are at adapting and evolving and producing products and really getting under the bonnet of these new technologies, because new technologies that we see tend to be made up of something that's already been about. It's just being used and processed in a different way. They've got history of other technologies where they've seen that and they can use that. We're also using, ability of, what may have been classed as fossil fuel. They're not an archaic, skill set that should be forgotten. They're hugely valuable and hugely integral to the transition that we need to make to renewable energies. Being able to use their IP and some of these new technologies as well, absolutely critical. And insurers are really good. And it's an important role they play, because if they're not willing to be able to underpin that, then you're not going to get the capital flow into it in order to deploy it to a commercialized state to achieve the net zero goals. So they play an absolute pivotal role.
No, absolutely, Carl. It's a key, underpinning of for investment in these new technologies. And so, that's got to be recognised. But I think there's a wider point as well on the macro scale here, that while we talk about the absolute vital role that insurance has got to play in supporting the development, deployment of these new renewable technologies, there's also, I would say, a really, really interesting area where, assessments are being made of just how much underinsurance there are of, physical assets, particularly from the risk of climate change impacts, whether that's flooding, fires, extreme heat, all of these associated problems. And I think there is a general sense that as a global economy have not properly quantified the risk that climate is presenting, whether it's on renewable energy assets or in fact any other asset. But we've got to, I think, as an industry, work with the insurance sector to really better understand those climate risks. Where have we got exposure and underinsurance? And I think, there's quite a bit of work going on in that space. And I'm sure Gallagher are giving some thought to that as well. So, and what I mean by that is governments, around the world who, are signed up and needing to deliver on their Paris Climate Accord commitments are having to take, pretty tough choices around some of the policies that they're making. And that invariably will impact businesses, and some business models, some sectors are going to be, at the receiving end of that. Quite rightly so, if we're going to tackle climate change and move to a low carbon future. But that's got to be a risk that needs to be managed. And we all want to see this just, manageable, equitable transition away from, fossil fuels and other dangerous emissions. But that's got to be done on a basis that, businesses can have clarity on what that transition is and have time to manage those risks. And I think that's, again, part of how businesses need to cope with this new future.
Yeah, and I think about that transition of skill sets then becomes paramount. If like you're saying on the business, it's then how you transition your workforce into the renewable energy workforce, because that transition needs to be done. That's a skill set ready there to transition straight over, isn't it? It's just being able to create the pathway or a good policy to be able to do that and enable people to do it is the key, isn't it?
Yeah, there's so many transferable skills in this space. And actually, if one thinks about the big home energy, upgrade that's needed in people's homes, whether it's smart meter, heat pumps, insulation, a lot of that is about reskilling, upskilling established trades, whether it's, what electricians need to do in the future or plumbers need to do, builders more generally, and so that is quite different than, we assume it's a completely new skill set. No, it's not. It's a transition for many of these things. There will be new areas, of course. Let's not kid ourselves about that. But actually, a lot of this can be quite readily upskilling an existing workforce with exciting and new opportunities.
There are so many different facets to this, aren't there? I mean, we've talked about, the people and skills aspect, physical climate risk and the transition and the new technologies, greener technologies as part of that. Both of you sort of touched on electrification. I was wondering if we could talk about that a little bit. You mentioned EVs, Trevor, but one of the big kind of topics for our industry right now is the boom in data centers to support the growth of AI. And that requires a huge amount of, risk insight and insurance. These things are all going to be drivers, aren't they, of that transition to net zero?
Yeah, and electrification is a global trend. This is unstoppable now. It's because it can drive greater efficiencies. The technology is generally more advanced, and of course, if you're generating clean power, it's a clean solution. So I think we're going to see more and more of that, whether it's certainly in our transport, but also in our heating, as two of the biggest areas that are going to, in my view, transition from fossil fuel driven fuels to electrification. So that's the trend. And of course, one of the challenges we are facing in the UK at the moment is that our grid system, the cables in the ground or overhead, aren't sufficiently developed to cater for this new transition from what was relatively few number of big power stations to this new world of thousands of generating assets. And of course, on top of that, the trend into electrification and the areas of big demand that we're going to see, whether that is through EVs, heat pumps, or indeed data center growth. And on data centers specifically, the government rightly wants the UK to be an AI superpower. We need data centers to drive that. Data centers need, big supplies of power in the right place at the right time, clean and at the right price. And bringing all of that together is a real challenge.
One of the things that really strikes me just listening to you both talk is that when it comes to the journey to net zero, you can't look at any one area in isolation. You've got to kind of look at the risks and opportunities inherent in, we talked about physical climate risk and the protection gap that is such an issue in many parts of the world. Equally, people risk and the need for a just transition and making sure those skills are there as we transition into these newer technologies. Equally, things like policy and liability risks around climate change and the transition. When we kind of piece it all together, what are the kind of key challenges from a risk and insurance point of view that the biggest minds in the insurance industry I know are kind of coming together to try and solve?
I think that, the biggest risk is that balance between profitability and trying to be able to underpin the growth at the same time. And that's challenging. As we know, insurers need to remain profitable. They've got their fiscal duties to meet claims at the end of the day. And if they're running unprofitably, they can't do that. So, it's how they balance that. And the way they're very good at that is sort of engaging with key stakeholders, which, could be NGOs, could be government, could be industry as well, really to sort of understand what the challenges are, what's coming over the horizon, what do they need to be involved in. They're very good at diversifying their portfolios. So they won't completely put all their eggs into one technology basket or one territory. That they'll put that spread of risk across as well. And they'll also share risk with other insurers. Supply chain risk is certainly tricky for them. And I think, same across all industries at the moment. But one of the things we're very good at is sort of identifying this, making industry aware where we're seeing challenges. Transformers are a big challenge at the moment. We know there's long delays, and it's making sure that clients are incorporating that into their business continuity planning in order that they can speed those claims up as much as they can. Because a bit of really scarce insurer, especially on the utility scale renewables, is the business interruption. That ensuing loss of revenue is a bit. They can quantify the property damage. It's very difficult for them to manage potentially that business interruption when you're thinking about staff shortage, skill sets, supply chain, geopolitical landscape, how you get stuff that it all adds up, and that does cause them potential challenges. And also it's up to industry as well to come to the table to insurers and meet them and try and work with them. And we've certainly seen, I think, over the last 5 years, I've been doing this year, certainly seen a complete mind shift in industry where they've come to the table and really want to engage insurers. I think they value what they bring to the table. They know, without it, as we said earlier, that you're not going to get the deployment of capital to get anything moving anyway. So I think industry has certainly come to the table. They certainly want to meet insurers, understand what insurers' risks and concerns are, take that on board and try and implement those practices into their own day-to-day business activities, and therefore mitigate the losses for the insurers and keep them profitable, and therefore that keeps them in the game.
I just wanted, if I may, just touch on this supply chain risk that Carl's mentioned a few times now. And it's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of that progress that we've seen in terms of the renewable energy deployment in the UK, we haven't sufficiently established a sort of a homegrown supply chain. A lot of the offshore wind progress that we've made, a lot of those supply chains sit out with the UK, which is a shame. But here's the thing, in my mind, that it's another industrial opportunity waiting in the wings, not just to establish more of the supply chains here, but where perhaps we can't have the supply chains here, is that when those materials, those technologies, those rare earths, those EV batteries, or whatever it might be, end up in the UK, that when we get to their end of life, we're keeping them here in the UK, and we're repurposing, recycling, reusing those materials. And that's a whole industrial opportunity in of itself.
That was absolutely fantastic. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about, or any parting thoughts?
I think the bit where insurers probably lag a little bit, and we're trying to get them on that journey, is more that energy transition. So coming back to that commercial business, that domestic consumer. So yeah, you've got motor insurers now that we're now asking to insure electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles. And again, yeah, they're used to insuring combustible materials, and it's about how you kind of educate them on the risks of lithium ion, that, you know, they're not any more dangerous than a diesel or petrol car catching fire, to be frank. And then likewise, you've then got real estate and property underwriters and insurers, and we're asking them to insure what is an engineering kit, i.e. solar on a roof or a battery system. And the best way in the world, you know, that's not what they're trained or have years of experience insuring. So it's almost, you know, about how we almost market these technologies to those insurers, that, you know, they're installed by competent people, they're maintained and they're looked after properly. And actually they're no more riskier than what you're already insuring within the property of the home anyway, you know, in terms of a gas boiler or anything. And I think it's just maybe trying to catch them up on this journey with us. They're very good. A lot of them have, you know, and are building it in. And I think, yeah, that's just a little bit there that I think, yeah, we do need to probably just give insurers a bit of respect about. Is that the traditional engineering side, great, easy, that's transferable. It's more the domestic, general commercial insurers that we're trying to get on board to help with this transition, because they're the ones that are really going to be able to assist the change from that sort of smaller domestic and smaller business perspective, which then feeds back into Trevor's point about putting the power back in the consumer hands.
This is a reminder to double down on the homegrown resources that we have here in the UK around renewables. So the sun, the wind, the bioresources that we have, the geothermal resources that we have, the list goes on, the hydro, you know, all of these technologies can really help the energy security. And what's more, bring down the price, because we know that renewables now have come down dramatically in cost. And while that cheaper cost isn't finding its way into consumer bills quickly enough, that is the direction of travel. And not to mention the job and growth opportunities that come from what are essentially the technologies and the industrial opportunity of the future.
That's all we've got time for today. Thanks for listening.